Well, it's lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for coming. I've been looking forward to this event, and hopefully, this is the first of many such events where we get people that are interested in decentralized technology, technology that they can take control of, technology that they feel ownership of, that they can build, that they can use, and do great things with it. So, of course, today, within the Meshtastic community, the goals are: can I get a node? Can I figure out how to install the app? Can I find one other guy that I might be able to connect to? And that's the level of excitement. But really, what I want to do is kind of start at the end. I want to paint a picture of what happens if we succeed and how we might succeed. Because the goal and the role that this technology has in our lives is really tremendous. There's an underlying need, there's an underlying sense that all of us have in our hearts. I'll follow through what I mean by that. But there's this overriding sense that what we have now, it's amazing. What we have now, it's tremendous in terms of the quality of graphics and the videos and all this stuff that we see on our phones. But is this what we thought freedom on the internet would be? Because we were told that this was going to be a free and open network that we would own, that we would control, and even many of the words used to describe these protocols, if you go back 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, those words are just words that point to freedom, but none of that freedom actually exists in the actual implementation of the technology. So with Spec 5, you see a small group of people who are building some devices, they're building some software, but they do have a very big dream. And that dream is to enable a global mesh network, a network that we all can claim ownership to, and a network that has many advantages in privacy and price and connectivity and robustness and so on and so forth. So I'll walk you through some of the ways in which we're thinking about this, at least at a high level, and then you'll see many of these ideas manifested either in our current devices or in software that we're working on for the future, and we can talk about that too. So as I mentioned, when I was growing up, I was really, really into technology of all kinds. Like many people my age, I got into technology with Commodore 64s at the age of 4 and started writing software in BASIC, and then got my IBM PC, and on an 8088 started writing software there, and then the rest is kind of a blur. Every platform that I could get my hands on, building things of every type, trying to write an operating system in C that would somehow, implement multitasking on an 8088 or a 286, all these crazy things. But my point is that we process these stories in this day and age as, oh, smart kid, nerd kid, hacker kid, went and did all these things. It's actually not just that. It's somebody that recognizes that technology is a very fundamental driving force in life, because technology is a tool, and the history of humanity tells us that tools shape people, and people shape societies. When you give up the understanding of the tool, when you give up the understanding of how the tool can reflexively change you, you give up control over yourself, and you give up control over your future, and you give up control over your society. Many of the things that you see manifesting in politics, many of the things you see manifesting in national security, are all tied to this Appleification of technology. Everything is a box, it's a black box. No, you can't touch it. No, you can't change the battery. No, you can't know what runs inside. No, you cannot stop any of these apps from sending all your data back to Big Brother. No, 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 no. So the internet was not that dream. If you look at the early maps, the early schematics of how the internet was connected, it was definitely not Apple at the center and Google at the center and Microsoft at the center. It was universities at the center. It was multiple connections. It was multiple protocols. It was multiple apps running on top of all of this. What we have now and what was designed way back when, there's almost no parallel. So that's what I mean when I say This is not rhetorical. When I say the internet was a dream, it was a beautiful dream, but it's becoming a nightmare. Now, why is it becoming a nightmare? Well, one of the reasons why is because of big tech. What is big tech? Now, it's kind of reductive and very easy to say, oh, big company, guy with a lot of money, bad guy. That's not how I think at all. It's a far more systemic problem. This is not about hate on companies that have become large. It's a systemic problem. What is the systemic problem? All my life, I've built startups. And by the grace of God, I've been quite successful. The last company that I did ended up being $1.5 billion AI company. So the way that I look at this, I've been around, done that, seen how companies are bought and sold, seen the ecosystem. Generally, what happens is that, I'll give you an example that probably you're all familiar with. Facebook saw a threat. They saw that Instagram and WhatsApp were two possible threats to them. So they went and spent an insane amount of money on Instagram. 14 guys were working at Instagram. Facebook paid $1 billion to buy the company. 14 guys, $1 billion. They went WhatsApp, very similar. WhatsApp was a communication platform. They went for about 50 people. They paid nearly $20 billion to buy that company. Now, you would look at that and you would say, what the hell is that? That doesn't make any sense. It makes total sense. Why? Because this is the way in which validated innovation can be sucked out of the technology ecosystem. Validated innovation, people that have proved their point, people that have shown that they will go on and become big, validated innovation can be sucked out of the ecosystem and can be attached back to the mothership. Okay, this is what happens, and yet every study about innovation in America says it's the little guys that innovate, it's the young companies that innovate, it's the guys in the garages that innovate. That's why the genesis story of every great American company is a couple of engineers in a garage just figuring it out. And then there's 10,000 people that come later trying to figure out how to sell it and who to market it to and what the prices ought to be and blah, blah, blah. But as far as the innovation is concerned, where is it coming from and how is it being lost? So very important. Now, this is a structural issue. It's not that Jeff Bezos is bad and Bill Gates is bad, and it's not about people. It's a structural issue. When a company becomes as large as these guys have become, it's inevitable that they have a gravitational attraction. To say that they don't is to not see the forest for the trees and not see reality as it exists in this world. So we don't want to fight with reality. We want to look at reality and figure out what is the best path forward, given that this is just how things are. Big telco, same thing. I won't talk about this as much. One thing that I'll tell you is that today on your phones, whether it's iPhone or whether it's Apple, you all know, or Google, you all know that pretty much everything you do is being watched, right? The activation word is being listened to all the time. Amazon devices have, without any activation, have recorded entire conversations, forwarded them to other people on your contact lists via bugs, but what that means is they are listening to you all the time. These devices are also using voice, and there was a study that came out which is quite convincing. They're listening to everything you say and using that to sell you products, and they are listening. They're not just using it for the wake word. 90% of the apps on your Google phones are sending data back that you don't know anything about, and that's another point, which is complexity. Look, if today, if somebody said to you, you have to take care of yourself, you have to take care of yourself, the human being, your body, your mind, your soul, you have to take care of these things. Nobody would dispute this. But yet, what would be required for you to do this? You would need to understand how the body works, how biology functions, what's good for you, what's bad for you, exercise is good, and so on, staying away from certain things. Technology, as I mentioned, is such a powerful tool that it's become part of you. It's no longer something that's separate from you. This phone that you hold in your hand is an appendage that is both a cognitive and a physical appendage. So many studies, serious studies done on this that I don't even want to get into that right now. So what does that mean? It means that We're okay not understanding one of the most important augmentations made to our bodily form in the last 100 years. How do we expect to live a successful and healthy life if we no longer even understand ourselves, i.e., our tools, i.e., that which shapes us, i.e., that which then in turn shapes society? How? Why are we okay with the Appleification of all these electronics that are extensions to ourselves? How? How are we okay with this? So, with this technology, really what we're saying is it's an opportunity to redream, to bring back that dream of an internet that connects human beings that direct their own evolution through technology that they understand, not humans that shun technology, not humans that don't take responsibility for technology, but humans that understand the technology that they want to use, and in understanding that technology, self-direct it towards improvement. That's what we're talking about. Now, bringing it down to stuff that's happened very recently, look at supply chain threats. Now there's people that are going to stuff explosives in your batteries and send a particular code and cause your face to blow up. The point is not the politics of it. Let me be very clear. The point is that once it's done, it's done. And that cat is not going back into the bag. There's just no way you're going to undo this now. So, frankly speaking, I'm not comfortable. I don't even know where my gosh darn phone is made. I don't know who these people are. I don't know who, what nationalities, what people, what mindsets, what criminal records work at these places. And now a nation state has shown us that this is apparently okay. You can go do this at thousands of people, and that's just kind of what it is. So whether you like the end effect of that or hate the end effect of that is kind of secondary. The thing to worry about is that you definitely would not like yourself or your family to be at the receiving end of something of that nature. And that's really what I'm here to talk to you about. These things have become real. Now, another thing I want to tell you, we think that we run VPNs on our phones and we're very secure. Please go and look at who all owns all the VPN companies. It's kind of like the CPG industry. You know, you go to the HEB aisle and you see all these different products with 47 different brand names. They're owned by 3 companies. The reason why they have 47 different brand names is because they want all the shelf space. Nothing's different other than your knowledge, right? And that's why you're thinking, this is great, and it's the same formula, it's the same thing, they just changed the color of the tube. Similar, VPN companies are owned by 2 or 3 large companies. There's one called Pango, as an example, which literally owns like 12 VPN companies. So everything that you route through VPNs, most security experts now say that it's probably best to just use plain old SSL and not even use a VPN. Okay, so there's hardware threats like the batteries that blow up. There's 90% of apps that are sending your data back. This is a study from the Financial Times. There's VPNs that are owned by monopolies that are exploited, that are taking all your data out. And then there's other elements like cost. Every time you're setting up an IoT network, you're in Texas, you're a rancher, you want to track your cattle, you want to track your assets. You want to track these things, GPS plus a SIM. Everything you do, give me my monthly. Give me my monthly. Everything is a monthly thing now. Why? Because they've put in a lot of money into their infrastructure and they want to monetize it with incremental, almost no usage, because when you're sending text back from a cattle tag, it's almost no usage, but they want to charge you. They want to, deepen that sort of margin. So there's cost, which is a big issue, which is stopping us from digitizing the world, because you will not implement this technology on 10,000 assets if you feel that you'll be paying the telco for each one of those assets, and God knows they might blow up your cow. You're not going to do it. Why would you do that? So you want the control, you want low cost, you want all that technology in your hand. So that's another element. And finally, the thing is, what country do we live in? We live in a country that historically has done pretty well under this idea that people ought to be free. And I'm not talking about like free of every obligation to humanity. I'm not talking about a country of lawless, wild people, but freedom of basic things. Like, for example, what would you say? AT&T forcing me to lock my phone to a provider even when I'm paying them more than what that phone is worth. Is that freeing me? No. And that contract per US law is completely enforceable. But it's wrong. What about these locked operating systems where I'm paying the full price of a device and I don't even know what the operating system is doing in my home, connected to my own network with pictures of my wife and my children, it can, in the most intimate circumstances. I don't even know what they're doing. Is that free? The fact that they can always listen and we can't do anything about it because they've got teams of lawyers and we are just ordinary Americans, is that free? No. It's really a system which to me is intolerable. So I'm trying to motivate why we're even getting together and doing this. So the question is, how compromised are we? And the reality is, totally. That's how compromised we are. We've got, when you folks have come here today, and you all have your phones next to you, you're all tying back to the same tower. And intelligence agencies, law enforcement agencies are allowed to look at who met who. Without listening into your calls, they can just look at tower data and say, these two guys were together, those two guys were together. This guy never meets that guy, but then suddenly he met him in a park. So there's so much information around co-location. These have actually been used for intelligence-based operations. Now, great, if there's somebody bad that they're using to catch that, that's wonderful, fantastic. But I tell you what, that assumes that the several million people that work in government are all perfect. And I'll let you come to that conclusion yourself. The other thing they've started doing is they've started targeting the builders. What do I mean by this? You saw Telegram, the network that was supposed to be the most free, text exchange network. So they couldn't get them to change the protocol, so they just abducted the founder. This is the level at which we are now dealing with people trying to take away even our right to have a private conversation. They abducted the founder. God knows what they did to him. I wasn't there. But he emerges several days later singing their tune. There's an old story about a law enforcement agency. They had a tough boss and they said, listen, go arrest, there was a crime. And they said, the zebra did it. The zebra did it. Go arrest the zebra. So they went out in the wilderness and they looked and they looked and they looked and they couldn't find a zebra. And then finally these guys are like, man, it's getting really hot. I'm tired. We got to go back. He said, well, we didn't find the zebra. He said, well, look at that. That's an elephant. Let's take him back. The boss will know that it's an elephant. I mean, there's a big difference between an elephant and a zebra. He says, don't you worry. They take the elephant, they whack the daylights out of him. And by the time he shows up to the boss, the elephant says, I am the zebra. I am the zebra. And that's kind of what happens when these people disappear. You don't know what's going on. And suddenly everything that law enforcement asked for, yep, done. Telegram gone. The other thing is opaque hardware and opaque software. So, which is that there's 2 billion transistors on a chip. Do you know what they're all doing? We don't, and none of these designs are open source. So RISC-V is an open source processor technology, which is very promising, which does solve some of this. And then there's zero-day weaponization. There's companies out there that are in the business of finding an exploit, never telling the company whose customers that exploit affects, and then selling those exploits to anyone and everyone, to illegal criminal organizations, to repressive governments, to us, to everyone. They don't care. They just take the money and they do what they want to do with that cyber weapon, really. That's the only way to put it. So enough with the negativity. Let's fix it. right? That's why we're here. I'm just telling you all the things that I feel so passionately about, because coming from a world of distributed systems and artificial intelligence and building large companies for enterprise technology and working in aviation and doing all of these things, one of the questions that even some of you have asked me is, well, why mesh protocols? And other than the fact that decentralized computing has been a long love of mine, the other thing that's a even deeper love of mine is just the idea that I can be free. And I know that the technology that we've all been collectively contributing to is taking us towards a direction where we will not be free. So how do we change that? And some of the challenges that we have in that. So let's talk about what resources do we have if we want to build a network. Well, there's a few ways to do that. One is kind of like a what used to be called sneaker net, which is I run up to you with a disk, you run up to somebody else with a disk, and that's how we trade information. Impractical, right? The second order up from that is that we use cables. We have some kind of a wiring mechanism, but now the city controls all that. You can't plant your wire anywhere you want, and you have to basically, the avenues between your home and my home and his home and her home are all controlled by the city. So that's not something that we have access to. The third thing is the spectrum. And this is not a picture that I expect you to see the details of, but this is to give you an example of the official United States frequency allocation radio spectrum image. And if you go to the FCC site, you can see a zoom out of this. But I've abstracted out of this three things that you should care about. Basically, that we have 900 megahertz, which allows us to do everything from these old analog wireless phones that we used to have in our homes, to some of the walkie-talkies, to MESHCON. Then we have 5.8 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz, which are generally used for Wi-Fi and higher speed Wi-Fi. And then we have MERS, which is lower frequency, lower power, and that's basically it. Those are the areas where you can transmit without a license. That's what we have to work with. All the other green, red, yellow, pink, all this other lavish goodness of resource, this is not for us, the common citizens of America. This is for the big companies, this is for the government, this is for, you know, the people that run and control the economy in the country. What we have is these four things. So how can we maximize these four things? The first issue is that on Meshtastic, let's just take a very specific example. One of the challenges today is that there's not enough of us. But the moment there's enough of us, the other challenge is that in general, in any one area where you're doing this transmission, you can expect up to a theoretical 1 megabit of bandwidth total, roughly. And that's not good enough. A lot of that will be eaten up with reflections, inefficiencies, resends, protocol messages, etc. Even if you half that, it's really bad. It's not good enough to do anything other than text with a small number of people. So we've got to be really, really smart about how we use that RF spectrum. One of the things would be that we have to solve those bandwidth limitations in these cramped bands. How do we do that? I'll talk about that. Another issue is range. So the range on these things can be pretty good if you've got line of sight. The range will be very bad if you don't have line of sight. So how do you solve line of sight? Well, we as ordinary citizens don't have the money and the resources to go build huge towers or to acquire license rights to place cell phone-like towers on the tops of big buildings. Maybe opportunistically we'll find one or two examples of that. But what are the cheap ways? We could fly a balloon, which is not persistent. We can fly a drone, which is slightly more persistent. It's more automatable. But then there are FAA restrictions to keep in mind there. So we have some tools. We don't have all the tools, but we have some tools. And then there's global connectivity. How do you go from miles to tens of miles to 100 miles to global connectivity? Satellites, of course, which is what the rest of the world uses, are complex and expensive. But the good news is that with LoRa, some academic projects have put LoRa CubeSats in orbit. And this is viable. I've been looking at how much it takes, for example, to get one of these satellites up up in the sky. They don't have very long lives because they are LEO satellites, low Earth orbit satellites. But for a few $100,000, we can get a satellite up there. And rather than use Mr. Musk's service, we can use a community-owned global service that connects the citizens of the world. That's something to think about. Not because it has the best bandwidth or it's better advertised than Starlink, but because it is free of crap. It is owned by the humans of Earth. That should mean something. So I don't know why this is running away from me, but I'll give you a few solutions really quick. So I mentioned to you that the bandwidth is it's tough to do much because we've got narrow bands. So one idea that we've been developing is this adaptive network with transmission power adjustment by doing the detection of your neighborhood and finding out how many dynamic active cells there are and turning down the power of your radio to a minimal optimal level just to reach the person that you want to reach. So what this does is if you think about a cell, in cell networks, these towers are pre-positioned. So, and their power is fixed power. But instead, what we want to do is on our algorithm, we want to adapt power super dynamically so that we do just what's necessary and essentially save physical space for other transmitters that might be closer that we will now no longer drown out. So this is just a concept, one example. We're working on our own protocol. We'll also tell you more about that. But this is a thing that if you employ some computer science thinking, you do some AI type predictive routing because you'll have to make some guesses and you do some location of roughly where people are, you can kind of do this. The other thing is directional Wi-Fi. So we know that Wi-Fi is also allowed to us, but right now we're not combining mesh with Wi-Fi for point-to-point links, but we can. And if we do that, then we can get multi-mile connectivity on 1100 megabit maybe, depending on the quality of connection. So super nodes, in my mind, would be people that are willing to set up a directional antenna, which is not expensive to do. You know, if you remember way back 10, 15 years ago, there was the Pringles Cantenna project. Many of you may have heard of that. It was optimized with a perfect length of cable inside the can to do directional over a mile connectivity with just Pringles can. So this is not expensive to do. This is something that not everybody would want to do, but maybe I can convince Daniel and Theo and Josh and Isaac to design something that's out of the box and you just plug it into a box and now you've got a directional, that's also solar powered like the relay. So this allows us to build very cheap, pay once, forget, no subscription, no nonsense, you own it, and start to connect these nodes with higher bandwidth points. So that's just one example. Then there are some new protocols coming around like Halo, which is essentially Wi-Fi over 900 megahertz. And this allows us to do at peak 4.4 megabits. So it's not a cure for all ills, but maybe it's 4 times better. Maybe it's 4 times better, which is better than 1 times better, right? I mean, it's something. So, so we'll take what we can get. And the biggest thing here is dynamically picking the right transport layer. So the protocol that we are working on, HyperMesh, ties together everything, every radio on the device. It has a GUID, a globally unique ID for every device, and that device is known by that GUID across all transport layers. And the routing table can take into account how all I can reach this device and what class of service I can deliver depending on how I'm connected to that device. So for example, can I send him an image right now? Can I send him a video right now? Maybe. Can I store and forward something and send him a video again later on? Can I add AI to try and figure out when the next time I'm likely to see this device with high bandwidth turned on? This becomes a type of networking that has never been done before, because this particular class of problem has never been attacked before. So that's where our innovation on the software side, I don't want to get too deep into it because we haven't yet launched the product, but this I think is a big, big deal. Being able to give people this mesh connectivity, multi-radio connectivity, all the simplicity of switching between channels and also delivering higher quality of service as is needed. Then built-in store and forward in the nodes. You've heard of the TC2 or the TC squared BBS. I used to be a huge BBS operator back in the day, and I was a sysop of multiple BBSs, and it was a wonderful community. It was a lovely, lovely way of getting people together, and there is room for that today. And for some reason, I don't know, I don't remember abuse being nearly as bad on BBSs as you now see it on, let's say, Reddit or the open internet. Am I just filtering memories, or do you agree? Any BBS user? Yeah. And that's what we need more of. We need more friendship and value creation and learning and community building, as opposed to hiding behind an IP address that has a VPN owned by Pango shielding you from the abuse that you direct at every other human on earth. And just making people unhappy, using technology to just give somebody a bad time and a bad day. What is that? So these are all the mechanisms I think that we can use. And finally, let me say CubeSats. I will tell you that my goal, our goal, Spec5's goal is to launch a CubeSat. We want to do that. We want to get together with our friends. I'm lucky enough to serve on the board of UT Austin Computer Science. My wife Zabe serves on the engineering board. And we are trying to figure out how to get the right expertise. There is tremendous CubeSat expertise at UT Austin, but there's people in Brazil, there's people in South America that have successfully launched CubeSats, and there are even a couple of rocket companies that we are either investors in or are owned and run by friends. So between all of this and what we know, and hopefully what our friends in the community know, we want to figure out how to get a CubeSat up there, because the only guys with this kind of connectivity cannot be, two big tech companies and two of the richest guys on the earth. That's not how any of us imagined technology. It was supposed to be, a democratic enabler, not something that's collected in the hands of five guys. So now that we will build this network, and you won't just be running around war driving looking for one other guy to connect to, once we have a network, which we can do, we have a pretty tremendous basis just even with the people in this room to start to do that. And many of your friends that maybe weren't able to come here today but are equally excited about it. We are building a network for, yes, for fun, for profit, and not Apple level profit, but the kind of profit that keeps us all going, that keeps our families fed, that keeps us happy, but at the same time that's worthwhile, but also that can retain some innate goodness, where we aren't auctioning off any goodness in this platform for even more money and even more money. So we've got to be careful about that as we lay the ground for this. But for fun, profit, and freedom, being able to do what we want on this network. So what have we started to do? So far, we haven't had the opportunity as Spec5 to get in front of you and to tell you what we're all about. You might see a device here and a device there and an app here and an app there, but no, we're thinking about this in a very holistic way, and we're thinking about it motivated by the core issues that we see plaguing our country, our people, even the world. So when we do games, what we're trying to say is there's innovative ways to have fun on this network. There's innovative ways to take the text protocol and make it into a fun thing. The next idea that we have is around vector art, because anybody that's been in computing history for a while or has used computers from Tektronix terminals to the RIP protocol interface back in the BBS days, you know that you can take text vectors and send them, and as long as the viewer is capable to render them, you can create imagery just with text. So we want to do things like that. We want to make it into a rich user interface. Then we want to make it plug and play. Just buy a few of these, solar powered, fire and forget just stick them in and forget about it. And you have now enabled connectivity for your community. Um, we're talking about new protocols like hypermesh, and I told you what we're thinking about with regards to the multi-radio capability. We're getting into multiplayer. We're also doing events like MESHCON is the first one, and hopefully the next one will be much larger, and you'll be able to tell your friends and families and maybe other hobbyists as the hobby continues to grow. So this is all the stuff that we're bringing to the community with humility and with genuine dedication. Because what I told you about why we're doing this, there's not one word of any kind of, we're not making up the rationale for why we're doing this. This is genuinely all of us believe this. Because life is short, there's 100 things to do, but this is important enough to do. And hopefully we get to do it with you guys. So thank you very much.